Amazing to see you in person. Hello.
It's good to be here.
Okay, so let's get to it. I just finished Multipliers. I read your book backward. That's a book that you wrote and then rewrote. I think it's important that we start there because marketing, when it's done right, marketing is a multiplier. But there seems to be this issue, which is they don't all work for impact players and multipliers. They work for diminishers. And that's a problem.
True.
Yeah. I mean, come on. This is anonymous, right? But you work for diminishers. Maybe you need to explain what a diminisher is. But so my question is, how would say you're going into an interview? Is there a way, a signal to sort of figure out, oh my God, that's a diminisher. I do not want to work for them. Just so we can start fresh there.
Okay, let's start there. I want to catch everyone up who are not familiar with these terms, multiplier and diminisher. What I noticed, it came out of my experience in tech, is that a lot of really smart people, once they become bosses, don't end up building really smart teams. That often people hold back and cower and perform at the minimum around really, really smart bosses. That really intelligent people can have a diminishing effect on those they lead. Other people equally smart can have a multiplying effect, that they're the kind of leaders that people tend to do their best thinking around and their best work around. I also found that most of the diminishing that's happening is accidental. It's coming from the accidental diminisher, the big-hearted rescuer, the fountain of ideas who does so much creative thinking nobody else has to, the perfectionist. There's a number of ways this happens. So if we want to start with, if you find yourself, I guess the first point of the book is be a multiplier. The people who work for you will really, really appreciate this. They will give you their best thinking and their best work. And you will create a work experience and a work environment where people say it's a little bit tiring but totally exhilarating. So if you find yourself choosing like a company and an opportunity, one of the things I learned in this research is it would be wise to not only look for jobs but to shop for bosses. And we often think of companies choosing us. We should be really choosy about who we work for. When young people ask me, gee, what kind of career should I do? What company should I work for? What job should I take? I'm like, doesn't matter. What matters, and particularly early on in your career, is who you go and work for. And you should be very choosy about that person. I'll give you my favorite interview question. This was given to me, Drew, by a man named Tom Friel, who was the former CEO of Heidrick & Struggles. A man who has placed a lot of CEOs, a lot of CMOs, and when he became familiar with this idea, he says, oh, that's what I've spent my career doing, trying to hire multipliers. And he gave me his favorite interview question. When he is interviewing someone he's considering to put into an executive role, he asks them this question, and the question is, tell me about your team. He is not at all listening for what they have to say about their team. What he's listening for, some of you might be able to guess this, what is he listening for? How long they can talk about someone other than themselves. Yeah, so it's like, tell me about your team. Oh, well, let me tell you about, Sundar, and let me tell you about Rachel, and da-da-da-da-da. And he's like, where is their orientation as a leader? Is it on themselves, their ideas, what they're doing, or is it on people around them? You can do the same thing if you're looking to work for a multiplier. Tell me about your team. And how long do they stay on? Do they understand their unique talents and the gifts that they bring? Do they, are other people seen as leaders around them? That's one way to look. Another is to look for their talk to listen ratio.
Right.
How much of the talking are they doing? One of my little litmus tests is I look for laughter. Is there laughter in the office? If you go into a company and nobody is laughing in the office, it's a pretty telltale sign. So getting the talk to listen ratio back under control. Back to you.
Okay, so I have to admit this. While I was reading the list of accidental diminishers, I'm going to let's see, idea fountain, always on, rapid responder, and optimist. I felt like the med student who's studying various diseases and thinks they have them all. I found one that I wasn't, which was perfectionist, okay? Which most people wish I was a little more of, yeah. So is that a common thing? Can you let me off the hook here, or is that just special? I'm kind of just about me.
It's a common thing. Okay, so
okay.
I'm going to rattle off the accidental diminisher tendencies in
Okay.
case anyone else wants to take inventory, see if you have all of these diseases as well. Let me see if I can name all 9. The idea fountain.
Check.
The always on
Check.
leader, the rescuer, the perfectionist, the protector, the rapid responder, the pace setter, the optimist, the strategist. Was anyone counting? I don't know.
No, that's enough.
Yeah. And it sounds like a monster, but it's this wonderfully well-intended monster. Every one of these things are things that we do with the very best of intention. You know, we think by being optimists, this is one of my little leadership, syndromes, I won't call it a disease, is like, hey, we got this, we can do it. You know what? This can't be that hard. We're smart, we're capable. And I've said those words way more times than I'm proud of. And it wasn't until I learned from someone who worked for me, he's like, I need you to stop saying that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why? I'm like, that's my way of saying I believe in us. I think we're capable. We're going to figure this out. We're going to navigate this. He's like, yeah, that's the very thing I need you to stop saying. I'm like, why? He says, because what we're doing is hard. It's flocking hard,
It's flocking hard.
And like, as my boss, I need you to acknowledge it. And it really changed me. And I now, when things were about to start new projects, new programs, I'm like, you know what? This one's hard. We're going to make mistakes. This one's going to hurt. Like, we're probably going to screw this up 3 times before we get it right. And it's amazing when I acknowledge the downside, it gives other people the role of playing the upside. Kind of like, Liz, we it's okay. We got this. And so it's easy to have 1 or 2 or a few of these things.
A lot of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it was the one that sort of struck me the most was the optimist one, because that's sort of who I am, and I feel like that's
came running in here with a penguin
I
hat
know,
on. I
exactly.
mean, like, woo, this could be fun, and always on too.
Yeah,
Woo!
exactly. But it's okay for an MC, just not a boss. Okay, we can do that. I have a small group too, and they're forgiving me over there. But the other one that sort of just kills me is the sort of the rapid responder, because we're in a service business, we know how to solve problems, we could do it. You see that email in your thing and go, I'll deal with that. Nope, not as leaders, right? So talk a little. So let's see. I was trying to figure out how, if you want to be a multiplier, regardless of your boss, where do you start? How's that?
If you find yourself working for a diminisher, let me quickly describe what the natural tendency, or actually, let me just ask, like, what do we tend to do when we find ourselves working for a tyrannical, controlling, micromanaging, bossy know-it-all? Like, I've worked for that boss before, right? Who here hasn't? Like, what is our natural tendency? Just really quickly, and just shout it out. Don't even raise your hand. What do we tend to do? We take orders, we start to shrink, and we have this diminishing effect. What do we do to cope? What is our natural?
Thank
lot,
you for
yeah.
that.
Yeah. So what's our natural human coping mechanism when someone is in our business way too much? Go around them, go over them, and we tend to give them like the straight arm, like, I don't want you in the meeting. I don't want my face. I don't want you in my business. What happens when you try to keep out a controlling boss?
Gets worse.
It gets worse.
Yeah.
What happens when you try to argue and prove that you are right with a know-it-all? It gets worse. So in short, and this is when I did the second edition of Multipliers, part of why I did that was I wanted to really do some deep research in how do we tend to respond when dealing with diminishers. And the answer is most of the ways that we respond exacerbate the diminishing. Right. And then we end up with an outcome of 2 diminishers. The original diminisher, and then us, who is ignoring, pushing out, disregarding, And maybe our politics
Yeah,
is in that same cycle.
it is, and I'm hearing you say that, and I'm really thinking about that. And in your book, you talk about how you need to bring them in.
Yes. So, and I think there maybe is a metaphor there for us this week on that as well. So what I found is that the best strategies for dealing with diminishers, like number one, is just turn down the volume, because our bosses speak loudly in our ears. And I think the CMO job perhaps gets it the hardest of any job. But it's to turn down that volume. And then when you look at really what works, and it just sounds wrong, it sounds like injustice, but it really works, is to be the multiplier up to that person. I'll give you, I don't know if we have time for two quick examples.
Go for it.
Two of my favorite examples came when I was doing a coaching project at Apple. And this was back when Steve Jobs was running things. Tim was the number 2 in that organization. I had a coaching assignment to get a couple executives, Tim ready and Steve ready. And you can imagine what that means. Like preparing them to be in that inner circle where they're going to get beat up a lot. And so I interviewed a bunch of Steve's inner circle asking, like, how do you work with someone who is brilliant and opinionated and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I think most people know that profile. And what I saw were people who decided that their job was not to just roll over and take orders from Steve, but to use his brilliance, like Ron Johnson, who was the head of Apple stores at the time. When he would go to pitch a new project, a new flagship store to Steve, who had very strong opinions about this, and you can imagine the likely outcomes of those meetings. Ron didn't just go in and say, hey, here's what we want to do, and then argue with Steve. He understood Steve's natural genius, like what was, Jobs better at than anything else that he did or anyone else around him. He wasn't this great innovator. He made things better. He took kind of cruddy technology and made it brilliant. And so Ron didn't wait for Steve to appreciate Ron's retail genius. He would go in and say, Steve, here's what we're thinking. And he said, we always did our best work. Here's what we're thinking. And then he asked them a single question. And you can predict what the question is. Steve, how could we make this better?
How could we make this better?
And so instead of him and Steve in a standoff of who's got the best ideas for the new flagship stores, Steve's like, well, you know what? Why don't we put cement there instead of this? And why don't we use plexiglass here because that'll refract light and da-da. And they walk out with their group's great thinking made even better and with full support from Steve.
And I want to keep going. It's amazing. And think about, there's probably the definition of a tyrannical boss would be Steve Jobs, genius and all of that.
Who was also an incredible multiplier in other ways.
So, and again, but this notion, and I know this, and I've seen this in my career, where you just shut down. I want to switch gears to impact players, because you all have a copy of the book. If you have not read the book, it is definitely...
Can I just make a small offer before we do that?
Please.
If there's anyone here who is struggling dealing with a diminishing boss, there is a chapter in the Multipliers book on this. You do not need to go buy the book. I feel strongly that everyone has this chapter who needs it. Just send an email to info@thewisemangroup.com. We won't make you sign up any lists. If you don't get a response, send it to me, liz@thewisemangroup.com, and I will send you this chapter. There's like 13 strategies for dealing with diminishers. Mostly it's multiply up.
And we will also, if you want to, we'll support at CMOhuddles.com. We'll make sure that you all get that.
You can distribute that.
We can take care of that for you. Thank you for that offer. All right, we got to switch gears to impact players, because all these folks, my opinion, top 10 business books, leadership books that I've certainly read. So what do we need to do, because these are CMOs, to find and hire, and then, how do you spot impact players in the wild?
The book that you have there is the result of a study I did interviewing 170 managers, asking them about the difference between a really rock-solid contributor, someone who's doing a fine job, someone I called an ordinary contributor, and someone that I came to call an impact player, someone who was no smarter, no more capable, no harder working, but someone who was making an extraordinary difference in their work. And in short, what I found is that the impact players handled situations of ambiguity and uncertainty much different. Like the ordinary contributor, they were stellar players in ordinary times. But when things started to get really messy and ambiguous and uncertain, their way of thinking and working fell short. And so the situations that the impact players handled fundamentally differently were messy problems, unclear roles, unforeseen obstacles, moving targets, unrelenting demands, like probably your reality for most of you and what you're doing. And so the book details like the mindsets and behaviors of these impact players. If you are looking to hire them, and hire them, in the wild, what I guess if I were to look for one thing, I would look for people who are comfortable or have learned how to make themselves comfortable in ambiguity. And I'll give you the interviewing tip from my little pilot. I called up a buddy of mine who was about to hire a dozen people on his team at Rivian. I'm like, hey, Ben, you've read this book. Will you look for some impact players as you're hiring? He's like, I'd love to. That's what I need. And so he was doing some behavioral-based interviewing, looking for people who were adept and comfortable in with ambiguity. And he used sort of a STAR technique, And what he said is he noticed that the people that he went and did a second interview with were the people who, when they talked about a situation where they had dealt with a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty, were leaning forward. Like the others were like, oh yeah, I can tell you about a time, there was this, we got this project canceled, and suddenly we had to, pull off this conference and da da da. Versus ones are like, okay, let me tell you about this. Like, okay, this was this, and they're like excited and they're energized by it. If I were to offer you a simple hiring strategy, it might be that one.
Watch for the folks that lean in. There's sort of this connection between the two books and so forth, because I'm thinking about a person that can deal with ambiguity and uncertainty probably can sort of deal with the diminisher above them too. They're not necessarily as reactive because they're sort of used to some things. But let's go on. We've hired them. How do we nurture them? How do we lead impact players?
Well, in short, like the kind of leadership they need looks a lot like what multiplier leaders tend to do. And if I could sum up multipliers, like for those who are like, oh, wow, that's an interesting idea, I should read that book, but you already have a tower of guilt on your nightstand and you don't really, I'm not pushing, I'm too old to be pushing books. No, I can sum up the book is in 2.5 words, like what these leaders do is they create an environment with safety, physical safety, psychological safety, intellectual safety, where people feel important, respected, included, belonged, all of that, where people feel like they're in control of their work life. And then it's safety and stretch. High expectations, accountability, asked to do hard things, challenging questions, challenging projects, work outside of your wheelhouse that stretches you. And this is the environment that impact players tend to thrive in, just enough, because it's a very courageous way of working.
And so one of the things that I hear, this is not about just being nice. This is not saying, oh, do whatever you can. This is, because you use
I worked for Larry Ellison.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And was he an impact player?
Larry was this incredible multiplier to me. One of someone else early days at Oracle, he said, like, if Larry trusted you, there was no greater multiplier. Like, I'm 24 and a half, maybe 25 years old when I'm like, Larry wants a university. Liz, he wants you to do this. Go build this thing. And I'm like, wow, that seems like an adult job. Right? Like, do we lack for, anyone who knows Oracle's history knows we were lacking for adult supervision.
I think you got that at like 24. So you must have the dimensions of, you obviously were able to grab a leadership role very young.
Well, I was super driven and dumb at the same time. Like, perfect. I was just so willing to say, I can do that. That doesn't seem too hard.
Right.
Which was a terrible trait later as a leader. But no, it's not this like nice, feel good, and it's not the way of working that many companies swung to during the pandemic. And so many, I imagine many of your companies are reeling with this. Almost every company I talk to is reeling with, like, we're all about loving people up and taking care of people and making this an easy, comfortable place to work. And now what are most companies doing? They're swinging the pendulum back the other direction, not to great results.
Right. Yeah,
And this whiplash is hurting our organizations. What the best leaders do is they do those things simultaneously. So there is no whiplash. There is no pendulum. It's like, but just creating a great place to work is not enough to inspire people to do great work. You also have to ask people to do hard things, hold people accountable.
Challenges and lay them out there. Well, I could keep going, but we can't. We're over time. You can note that, Kathy. But if you want to hear, we just spent an hour together on a podcast that you can find. We also recorded this as what we call a career huddle, which is a benefit to the huddlers. So we have to wrap up with 2 do's and 1 don't when it comes to when it comes to grooming impact players. 2 do's, 1 don't.
Let's start with a don't. Don't overplay your impact players. Because like superstar athletes, they need some time on the bench during a game and to recover. Like, you can end up overplaying, overutilizing people to the point where they burn out, and underutilizing the rest of the team where they are bored out. Both of end up diminishing. A couple do's. I think maybe the biggest do is don't think of impact players, and for those of you who are going to read the book, don't think of it as a person, an individual that you put in this as if you're playing like duck, duck, goose, like ordinary contributor, impact player.
Impact player.
Yeah. Don't think of it this way. Think of it as a moment in time. It's a play. Like, when you've launched a new product and someone has had a huge impact, like, they are the impact player of the moment. They have made this play and it was critical, and celebrate it. But when you move away from it being a person and it becomes a characteristic of a play in a point in time, then it is open to everyone on the team. And then you have people who aspire to work like that.
That's good. That's good. You killed it. You killed it. How could, keep that 1 second. So just because I know you're crazy busy, is there a way to people can keep up with you or engage with you?
Oh, sure. I'm fairly easy to find on social media. Liz, I don't know if we even use X anymore, at Liz Wiseman. The WisemanGroup.com. We have this little podcast we do. It's not a big podcast. It's really kind of our insider community of people who are really implementing these ideas deeply inside of organizations. We're not trying to do it broadly. It's called Leadership Matters. You're welcome to tune into that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's
Thank
it.
you.
I'm
Can
fairly
we give
easy
a
to find.
big round of applause for Liz? Thank you. Amazing.